California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are coming to you from our Sacramento Bureau, and we are joined by Chris Holden. He is a member of the California State Assembly. And sir, I want to speak with you, if we may, about fracking,
Yes.
Which is what?
Well, it's a technique that's used to extract or break up sediments under the ground that allows for extracting minerals that could be used for oil production and the like, and for processing.
So there's a lot of excitement surrounding fracking. There's a lot of fear surrounding fracking. Right. I mean, we know that the Monterey Shale contains about 64% of the nation's deep rock deposits, 15 billion barrels.
Right.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
But for some, it's scary.
Well, there are environmental concerns.
Right.
What does the process do to potentially impact negatively on the environment, on groundwater, runoffs, things of that nature? And so it is sort of, even though it's been done for an extended period of time, even here in California, because of that particular opportunity for some, as they would view it, it has created a lot of fear, because that will create really a ground shift, no pun intended, but they'll create a refocusing on the practice, and because of the type of production that would have to ensue, what does that do to the structure of the ground? So
a lot of news last year with regard to how California and whether California would regulate fracking and or put a moratorium on fracking. We know New York put a moratorium on fracking.
Right.
We now have regulations in place. Senator Pavley had a bill that passed, signed by the governor. Regulations are now in place. What do you think of the regulations? Do you believe that they go far enough to address the concerns of those that may feel that fracking is a risk to our environment?
Well, they went far enough as far as my ability to then be able to support the legislation. I think that there's still opportunity for us to gain more understanding and knowledge of how this practice can be managed and addressed going forward. And that's part of why I really want to take an opportunity to really better understand the science behind it, because there are the proponents who will fashion the arguments around why this is so important to do and the cost benefits and all that.
I mean, the proponents have said that fracking could create almost 3 million jobs, could put another $25 billion into state and local coffers.
Right.
That would be nice.
Especially when you're trying to address the issue of education. You have so many areas of expenditures that we just aren't able to fully fund. It would be nice.
There's a question about whether under the regulations an EIR would be required for individual fracking projects. Have you heard about that concern?
Well, I think that sort of bears itself out probably in terms of how most local communities look at issues of more local concern, and that is, what is that impact going to be to the surrounding community? And it's a fair question, because the geography, quite frankly, is different as you look at different areas of the state, even the country.
Right.
There's some areas of the country that it becomes very difficult, and it's fracking is not even an issue.
Right.
Others where it is, the geography is such, and the opportunity to extract is there, that it becomes more.
I want to ask about your communities in the San Gabriel Valley. What are you hearing from your residents, your constituents, about fracking?
We don't have the same issue as maybe some other parts of the state.
Right.
There's certainly the geography in the San Gabriel Valley doesn't suggest that that's going to be a practice that will be used. But we have activists, we have people who are keyed in on the issue.
When we come back, I want to continue our conversation about fracking, about water. His name is Chris Holden. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, let's talk about how fracking is done. And the way it is done is you inject a lot of water into the rock to help break up the rock and release the oil.
Right.
So, using water. We're in a drought right now.
Right.
Should we be using water to break up rock to get to oil?
Right. Well, obviously the high power force of the water is probably, and I'm not going to become the spokesperson for the industry, but I will say that it seems to be probably the most appropriate way to get at it. The amount of chemicals that are used is a small amount compared to other ways of doing it that maybe use more chemicals.
And you mentioned chemicals, and that really is the sticking point.
Yeah.
Because under the regulations, the chemicals that are used to create that breakup must be disclosed unless they're a trade secret.
Right.
I mean, that is an exception the size of Montana.
Right. Right.
And so where do we go with that?
Well, I think at some point we get to a place where, what is the trade secret?
Right.
I mean, if you're using mostly water, 90 some odd percent,
Right.
And it's the pressure that really is creating the impact. I think, and that's where the real concern is. If chemicals are used, how much of the chemicals are used, and what does that do to the water table if that water permeates down to the table? So those are legitimate concerns. But trade secrets, I think, there is a disclosure part of this, transparency, that I think is worth the conversation. Public needs to be aware. We get to read on the back of labels of products that we buy all the time, just what is in the product. And so I don't think that there should be any real prohibition against the public certainly having the ability to look in and see what chemicals are being used in this process.
We know as part of Senator Pavley's bill, there was an agreement that studies would be conducted, further studies, to look into the question of the efficacy and safety of fracking. The EPA has engaged in some studies. The industry and the environmentalists are fighting over what those studies actually say. We know that there was methane found in Texas, there was benzene found in Pennsylvania, so that causes some concerns. But in the 21st century, studies have become so politicized. Science isn't science anymore. And so where do you as a member go when you're handed the results of a study and you're being influenced or attempted to be influenced by the competing interests?
Well, and that's why we're trying to get ahead of this as best we can. My office is going to be holding a workshop coming soon, which will deal with really the issue from a scientific perspective. We've invited, but we have not.
Science.
I know, it's the science, but I think that's important because that sort of is the foundation to this.
No, I mean, I agree. I'd love to go to that workshop to hear about the science, but science, this, sir, has become politicized.
Right. Well, we've tried very hard to find individuals from Caltech, Cal Poly Pomona, who are seismologists, who are water experts, a water master, others who really are independent and they really don't have a bias. I mean, we're trying hard to make sure that we can comb through the participants to make sure that no one is really leaning one way or the other, because I think the public has a right to have unfiltered information. Let the facts be able to speak, let the science be able to speak for itself. My guess is that if you really look at this from an objective point of view, that the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Arguably, yeah. I mean, that would make sense. But in the background of all of this, the state is looking to become more clean and green. And is fracking clean and green? I mean, we would be extracting carbon fuels, fossil fuels?
Yes.
So should we even go down that road?
Well, I think that that is a legitimate question.
Right.
But I think that there's a recognition. Now, if there was really no incredibly large depository, this is a massive depository that allows for really positive on the other side. It's all relative, but I think that there is something there that would suggest we have to explore it. We have to look at it. We have to determine whether or not the cost outweighs the benefit, or if the benefit outweighs the cost.
I mean, there's no doubt that over the next year or so, there will be a lot of news about fracking, not only in California, but throughout the nation, because we've heard of earthquakes that may or may not have been tied to fracking. We've heard of chemical. West Virginia had their issues, unconnected to fracking, of course. His name is Chris Holden, member of the California State Assembly. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition. We'll be right back.
What is the first state to ban the practice of hydraulic fracturing? New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, or Vermont? Vermont became the first state in the union to ban fracking when they passed a moratorium in 2012.
It's California Edition coming to you from our Sacramento Bureau. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Das Williams. He is a member of the California State Assembly. And sir, you represent some of the most beautiful areas of our state, the Central Coast, Santa Barbara. But we know that there are parts of the Central Coast that are really hurting as a result of the drought that we are facing. I want to talk to you as a member of the Assembly representing parts of the Central Coast. How are your communities doing?
Well, I think they are responding appropriately. The governor has declared a drought emergency for the whole state, and it really is up to us to deal with that appropriately by cutting our individual water usage.
I want to ask you, though, about the declaration, which came in January. What the governor said is, I'd like you, Californians, to voluntarily cut your usage by 20%. Now, I think in some ways that was inspired because it's a voluntary measure, but I'm wondering if maybe the governor should have pushed a little harder, because we know in some communities there are mandatory conservation measures. Do we need a mandatory measure in California?
Well, I suppose that there will be need, if this continues for much longer, for mandatory measures. In the past, though, I think the worst part is that we probably should have declared it earlier. I mean, we are the third year into a drought. And the many communities do respond to voluntary cutbacks in usage. And I think Santa Barbarans and Venturans in particular are willing to do that. We hope the whole state will. And it's very easy to reduce your water usage by 20%. It's not just the things that people think of turning off the water, you know, when they're washing their hands or taking shorter showers. There's actually a huge amount that can be saved, particularly in watering less or in re-landscaping what you have out in your yard. That is the biggest household usage of water. And so I do want to give people the opportunity to do this. Many jurisdictions now have programs where they can get a portion of re-landscaping their homes paid for by the water district. These are normally called cash for grass programs. Not in reference, of course, to it's just turf grass. That's what the cash is for. In our jurisdiction, Santa Barbara, they call it the Smart Landscape Rebate Program, which I thought was a really boring title, but it's a very good program. They will pay up to half the cost, up to $1,000 for re-landscaping your lawn. So if you live in Santa Barbara, you should give them a call at 564-5460 or look it up on the website, santabarbaraca.gov. In Ventura, they have a similar program by a nonprofit, and it's called SoCalWatersmart.com, and they will give rebates of up to $1 per square foot, which actually is a decent amount of money if you calculate that. That can be hundreds of dollars of a rebate.
I know the city of Los Angeles has a program through the DWP, so these programs absolutely exist. There is a lot that Californians can do individually, but the reality is, and I don't want to create kind of a war between varying interests, but ag uses 80% of the state's water. And so while we can impact the water usage by no doubt, it's still an ag issue that is really pushing this matter. And that's what I want to talk about when we come back, sir, because so many Californians are worried and scared, and they're not really sure where to go with this because they look at the drought of the last 3 years and see another 3 years coming, and they're panicked. For our viewers on HLN, I want to thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back with Das Williams, Assembly Member from Santa Barbara. So, sir, let's talk about the ag industry because, again, I don't want to create this tension between residents, ag, whatever it may be, but the reality is, in the final analysis, ag is a very significant user of water. You think about ag on the Central Coast. What role does ag play in this?
Well, of course, you're right that 80% of the state's water usage is agricultural. There is room for additional conservation. I will tell you that the last 20 years, really conservation technology has taken a hold in the state. The Central Valley is now the center of water conservation technology for the whole world. And you can do this with drip irrigation.
Right.
You can do this with atmospheric controls. There are various things, and most of those applications are also good for big water users in an urban setting. If you're a condo association, you can have these installed. If you have a large lawn, you can have atmospheric controls. And again, your local water district will often pay for them.
But what we're seeing, though, is that some interests are looking to help ag in a very significant way, and that's not a bad thing per se. We know the House Republicans in Washington passed a bill, unlikely to make it out of the Senate, but that bill is very specific, and it looks to relax endangered species protection, to roll back some environmental protections. The Republican caucus in D.C. feels as if that fish are being put before families.
Well, they forget that people fish those fish.
Okay.
And there is an industry, and really, in my mind, taking water away from farmers in the north to help farmers in the south is a solution that's never worked for the state of California.
Right.
It continues to make us dependent on a very inefficient system, and the most cost-effective way to increase our water supplies is to squeeze out more with conservation. Because as much as some communities have adopted this, there is a lot more water to conserve, number one, and number two, to recycle water.
But
No water in this state should be used just once. That's a ridiculous waste.
and we hear you, but look, for the last 4 years, we've had a bond measure kind of percolating, if I can use that term, yet never made it to the ballot. We know that there are competing bond measures that would address some of the issues. Anthony Rendon in your caucus has proposed one. Lois Wolk has proposed one. 2 out of the Republican caucus in the Senate. Vidak and Cannella have proposed. But we're still not really sure where we're going to go with it. We don't know if we're looking towards more storage, if we're looking towards more recycling, more conservation. I mean, there's a real sense of where we go from here.
Well, there's a lot of question marks with the bond, but I've got to tell you, we are prepared to take action on an emergency drought response legislation. This was unveiled last week.
Right, Governor Brown recently unveiled, right?
It's a very balanced plan that includes getting out money for shovel-ready projects in water recycling, water conservation. It also provides the very needed emergency relief for the now over 20 communities that are going to run out of water.
But is it
in the
enough?
next.
I
No,
mean, I'm sure
it's not enough.
you've seen your Republican colleagues call it a drop in the bucket, and so it's a catchy phrase, but again, there's a lot of Band-Aids.
I always love that.
Of course.
If we don't spend enough, the Republicans call it a drop in the bucket. If we spend too much, they call it pork.
Yes.
So you're
Point
killed
well
either
taken.
way.
Point well taken. But that being said, this is a crisis. I mean,
It is.
President Obama came to the Central Valley. If he's coming to the Central Valley, this Speaker John Boehner came to the Central Valley. Our federal leaders, our national leaders are coming because they see the severity of the issue.
And I think people need to understand and not be deceived by the fact that we've gotten some rain recently.
Yes.
That we are in a drought. We are not going to get out of it this year. It would need to rain just about every day between now and the end of the rainy season for us to get out of it this year. That is unlikely to happen. We
Some
need
are
to
calling
continue to make measures. But I've got to tell you, the history of my area, which is one of the most drought-prone areas of the state, Santa Barbara and Ventura County, the history of our area speaks to the fact that we can take control of that destiny. Most of my communities are not state water dependent. That's because we have decided to live within our means, even in drought-prone areas, and to diversify our supplies. The most important part of that is water recycling and water conservation.
He's Das Williams. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.
How long was the lengthiest drought in record world history? 5 years, 12 years, 33 years, or 400 years? The world's longest drought lasted 400 years from 1571 until 1971 in the Atacama Desert of Chile, the driest place on Earth.
It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are coming to you from our bureau in Sacramento. We are joined by Steve Fox. He is a member of the California State Assembly. And so I want to speak with you about Jessica's Law. Jessica's Law actually grew out of your district. Some of your predecessors, George and Shara Runner, wrote Jessica's Law. What exactly does Jessica's Law do?
It does a number of things. It identifies where the sex offenders are. It puts sex offenders in a specific area, and that's probably where one of the problems is. It states that you cannot have a sex offender within 2,000 feet of a school. Now, in a sense, that's a good thing. The problem is of all the districts in Los Angeles County, the only county that has a lot of space, 2,000 feet from a school, is my district.
Which is the Antelope Valley.
Which means that most of the sex offenders in the whole of LA County end up getting dumped in my district.
And let's talk about that challenge because, look, we all abhor what sex offenders have done, but in the final analysis, we have a system of laws and a system of punishment, and if you serve your time, you're going to be released.
And that's wrong, I have to tell you that, because we're not just looking at the person, they've done the crime, now they do the time. First of all, the law was different in the very beginning where they were shorter sentences. Now we have longer sentences.
Right.
So we're stuck with a lot of people being released under that old concept of a small amount of time. But we have to go from the premise sometimes that it's not just they've served their sentence, but we also have to protect the public.
No doubt about it. The challenge becomes, you know as well as anyone, that the U.S. Supreme Court has ordered that our prison population be decreased. So you have that pressure coming at you, and then you have the challenge that the Antelope Valley faces.
And the Supreme Court is wrong, and I'm an attorney, and I will tell you that right off.
Right.
That they look at things on that one little issue, cruel and unusual punishment. Well, releasing these criminals on the public, that's cruel and unusual punishment.
I hear you, and I know many of your members would agree, your colleagues, that the Supreme Court got it wrong. The problem is I don't think Governor Brown wants to be held in contempt of court. And fortunately for Governor Brown, there is an extension of time within which the state needs to release or decrease its prison population. But back to this issue, though, of Jessica's Law, because you do bring up a very good point. Antelope Valley, beautiful community, it's suburban, families live there, and yet because of the way that this community developed, you get the sex offenders dumped in your communities.
Well, first of all, Jessica's Law only looks at from that period of time. Since that time, we've had about 700 dumped into our community. It doesn't identify all the ones before that time, so we have even more than 700 sex offenders in our area. Now, what is worse, as I discovered in the state budget, they ID'd $21 million to protect habitual sex offenders like the pillowcase rapist in our community. That's rewarding bad behavior. That's protecting them, not protecting us. So put the money for more sheriffs or something.
So what's your proposal? You are looking to amend Prop 83, Jessica.
I have a couple proposals. One, I'm working with the district attorney's office. Right. They want to be able to have the opportunity to argue with the judge that where they're being released isn't the best place. The pillowcase rapist's last conviction was not in LA County.
Right.
But because he requested to be in our county, they were going to allow him. The community got together. I got together with our community.
Right.
We signed over 1,000 letters. We stuffed them in pillows, and I delivered them directly to the district attorney's office saying, he's not coming to my community.
And what happened?
He's not coming to my community.
Where's he going?
That's their problem. My problem is I'm protecting the citizens in my community. So we're allowing the district attorney with our bill, and we're working with them. Before, they didn't have an opportunity to argue with the judge. The judge just, decided what they want. But in this case, they will be able to argue and say, this is not what the law says. This is not in the best interest of the public, not the criminal, but this is not in the best interest of the public to release them.
When we come back, I want to speak with you about the drought, a very significant issue. Our guest is Steve Fox. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, as we continue our conversation, I want to speak with you about the drought. Antelope Valley, beautiful area where you represent, dry. I mean, when you drive through that, it is so dry. What are you seeing?
We're in the third year of a drought, and most people don't realize that. We've looked at the 100-year cycle, and this is the worst cycle we've seen.
Some would say in 500 years. I mean, I read a study which said it's the worst year since 1580.
And it looks even worse. This is the first year that water through the state is not coming to the Antelope Valley. The only water we're getting is water that we've banked previously in 2013 in Kern County, and now we're tapping into that. When that's gone, the question is, where's it going to come from? In the next 8 weeks, there are 17 cities in California that will not have water. In the next year, it's going to be up to 40 cities. Luckily, the Antelope Valley gets about 40% of their water from groundwater, from other areas. And if we start conserving, we'll be able to hopefully outlive this drought. But that's not the answer. What the governor's done is take $687 million in immediate funding as a quick Band-Aid. $500 million are out of the current budget on shovel-ready programs that we're now going to put into effect a lot quicker. In addition, that's the immediate. We have long-term solutions. We have a potential water bond, which is be about $6 billion, which will be in projects all through the state, whether it's aquifers, watersheds, where we're looking. The other is that the governor wants to have 2 tunnels. And that would cost around $67 billion. That would be passed on to the ratepayers.
The Bay Delta
Right.
Conservation.
And now the problem with his idea is it presupposes there's water up north to deliver to us. And since most of the water has gone to the Pacific Ocean water runoff, there isn't necessarily water to give us. So not only does the $67 billion, $25 billion of which would be jobs up there, not create jobs down here, but if they have a drought up north, as they have now, there's nothing to give us.
But let me ask you about the bond, because I think that is what the public is focused upon, is the bond that would have been on the ballot last cycle and could have been on the ballot the cycle before, but that didn't happen. Many bond proposals are floating around. Democratic proposals, Republican proposals. What seems to separate the proposals is that the Republicans are looking for more money towards storage, whereas the Democrats are not as focused upon storage. What's your sense about the need for storage?
I think that we need more reservoirs in our area. So number one, when we need water, we don't have to wait for it to come up north. We don't have to find out even if it is even up north.
Right.
That we have control of our own reservoir. So, and the jobs to build it are down here. So I think more does need to be geared towards, I want a reservoir in my district.
So that's storage.
It's storage. So I think that, I'm not going to say which party, but the bottom line is I think that's more the right answer.
That is a long-term answer. Most would agree that we do need more storage. But what do we do today?
Well, today we're going to have to, and you can see on my website, there's a list of things you can do to conserve water. You can make the difference. This is just like World War II. We're in this together, and we have to each do our part. That means when you're watering your lawn, do it at night so that the sun doesn't evaporate the water. This means that you take shorter showers. This means that you find ways that you can make the difference. And we think that each individual will cut down about 20% or so.
That's the hope from the governor.
That's the governor's hope, but and again, we're not going, I don't believe in penalties or anything, but I do believe that we can do this together. We'll end up spending less on our water bill, so it'll help all of us. Plus the fact that we have groundwater and other myriad of sources of water, we can live past this drought, and that's my hope.
What's interesting, though, is ironically, Southern California may be able to live past this year's drought because for some miraculous reason, Southern California has been able to store, conserve better than other parts of the state. So while we're all in this together, in some ways we're not. I mean, the 17 communities you mentioned, they're all central and north, whereas Southern, which traditionally had been the problem child in the water wars, is doing better.
That's correct, but we have to look long term. You can't say I'm going to fix it today. What about our children and our grandchildren? This has to be long-term solutions. That means we do have to build infrastructure. We have to look at the water aquifers in the ground, that if they're destroyed, they can never be rebuilt.
That's true.
That's something we have to be concerned with. So we have to really look at the $6 billion bond as compared to the previous bonds that had too much fluff in it. We've cut out the fluff.
$11 billion.
Yeah, there's none of these, pet projects. This is what the public needs, and that's all we're going to work towards.
Do you believe the public will be ready to vote for a bond come November?
It's a good question. I think if we are very transparent and we tell the public what it's going for and how it's helping them, then they will make the decisions in their best interest. And in that case, I believe they're going to do the right thing. Will
the parties come together and support a bond together?
I don't know that that's relevant. I think it's up to the public, not the parties.
Okay.
We are in this boat, and we will sink or we will swim, to use a term, together.
Exactly.
So it's time we work together, and each of us do our part.
He is Steve Fox. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.